Chicago.
Welcome to Bridging Chicago. I'm Leona Kuhar, your host. On this episode of Bridging Chicago, we have two guests, Ellen Ray and Cecile DeMello. Ellen and Cecile both have deep roots in community service. Ellen is the CEO of Chicago Cares, a nonprofit organization started over 30 years ago that connects volunteers from all over Chicago with various community organizations in Chicago. In her time with Chicago Cares, Ellen has implemented innovative approaches to help Chicagoans find their role in community service and helping to build a better city. Cecile serves on the board of directors of Chicago Cares and is the executive director of Teamwork Englewood, a partner organization of Chicago Cares. Teamwork Englewood is an organization that works to improve the lives of residents of Englewood. Englewood is a century and a half plus old community located on the south side of Chicago. Welcome, Cecile and Ellen.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.
I'd like to just start by asking each of you to tell us a little bit about yourselves. Are you originally from Chicago? Do you currently live in Chicago? Cecile, we can start with you if you'd like.
Yes, I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I went to Chicago public schools and I currently live on the south side. I actually live in the Englewood community, just a couple blocks away from Teamwork Englewood's administrative offices. And I raised
Okay,
my family in this community.
nice, very nice. And Ellen, how about you? Are you originally from Chicago?
I am. I'm from Chicago's Northwest Side. Grew up in the Logan Square Humboldt Park community. Third generation resident of that area, and only recently just moved out of the neighborhood, which I always joke was an identity crisis, having to change my zip code. Because as a lifelong Chicagoan, I feel like you have attachment to your zip code. So I went from
Yeah,
60647 to 60641, and only moved a mile away, but still had a hard time moving out of the neighborhood that I have called home for most of my life. But yes, also a product of Chicago Public Schools, and a proud lifelong Chicagoan.
yeah, I am a lifelong Chicago resident, and I actually grew up on the south side of Chicago. And I have vivid memories of the Sears store that at one time was in the Englewood neighborhood, going there as a child. Um, and, I've lived on the south side for many years. I currently live more southwest in the city, but a lifelong resident. So always a 606 zip code of some sort.
Yep.
So, Ellen, can you tell us about Chicago Cares and its mission?
Certainly. So as you mentioned, Chicago Cares is a more than 30-year-old organization now that is mobilizing volunteers to build a stronger, more unified Chicago. And for us, at this moment in our city's history, that's really about building a more vibrant and equitable city through
Hmm.
service. So we bring Chicagoans together. We like to say that we bring the power of people to the work of change, and that there
Okay.
are organizations all over the city. We focus particularly on the south and west sides of Chicago that are doing fantastic work day in and day out, to address the needs of their communities, to build a vision for their future. And our goal is to help connect those transformational and impactful organizations to the volunteers and the talents and resources that come with them, to advance their mission and their work. And part of what we think is so unique about our work is that in a city like Chicago, where we do experience a lot of daily segregation and daily sort of structures that keep us from building relationships across lines of difference, that our work is actually bridging work. It's a work that brings Chicagoans together in action, which we think is really unique. That it isn't just that we're bringing folks together to learn about the issues, which we are, and to
Right.
talk about the issues, which we are, but that we're also bringing Chicagoans together to act on the issues that are facing our city. And we're doing that by centering the wisdom and lived experience of people who live in these neighborhoods, who know the solutions and know what needs to be done. And in that way, we're really helping to connect Chicagoans, and build a sense of relationship and community that can bring impact to
Hmm.
the pressing issues that are facing our city today.
So actually get concrete results from all the efforts.
Yeah, and that building relationships is one of those concrete results. We actually
Hmm.
believe that all change happens in relationships, and that if we aspire to big change in Chicago, that our relationships have to be as deep as our aspiration is big. So we really think that it is a concrete action to build a relationship with your neighbor
Hmm.
that leads to new action in the world. And so we're really excited both about, yes, what we get done through service, but also the ways in which it helps us build a sense of community and connection that can help us imagine a different Chicago, because we're hearing about the world from someone else's perspective, and we're building our sense of empathy about what it means to live in a community that's not yours, or to navigate that community day to day. And so we think that that understanding and empathy and really knowledge gained through those relationships is just as powerful as the work we get done through service.
And before I go on, I was going to ask Cecile a question, but Ellen, you said something that sparked a question in me. So both of you ladies being lifelong Chicagoans and basically living in smaller type communities, do you feel that the sense of community is the same today as it was when you were growing up?
Oh, I'm gonna let Cecile start.
I think I have a unique experience on this one. I actually feel more connected in Englewood, raising my family, than I did in Washington Park, where I grew up.
Okay.
I grew up right across the street from the park. So first of all, I
Mhm.
didn't have a lot of neighbors in the first place, right?
Okay.
Because we have a big park
Yeah,
across the
that's
street.
a huge park.
Yes, and uh, it was a big condo building next to us. And it had a very transient tenants, right?
Mhm.
Where I've stayed in Englewood, both in West Englewood and Englewood, I had relationships with my neighbors. I still have relationships with neighbors in my old house I lived in.
Okay.
We took care of each other. We talked about what's going on in the community. It's a different type of care that I didn't have when I was growing up in my neighborhood in Chicago originally.
Mm.
And I imagine, because I remember that, and I still have that sense of community with neighbors, and I clearly remember that growing up. It's a big comfort. It really, truly is.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Definitely.
I have a different, growing up in Logan Square, Humboldt Park, Logan Square in particular is a community that's experienced a lot of change and gentrification over
Hmm.
my lifetime. And so the Logan Square that is today is not the Logan Square I grew up in a lot of really concrete ways. And I think I've struggled with those changes and the
Hmm.
realities of displacement that folks have lived with as the community has changed, and watching friends and family members who couldn't afford to live in the neighborhood move out of the neighborhood, not because they
Yeah.
didn't feel that sense of connection, but because the economics changed and their
Yes.
ability to sustain their residency in that neighborhood shifted. So I think, again, I think we can make place wherever we are, right? We can build community wherever we are. And I've enjoyed, having now moved, I've enjoyed the process of building community again. And I
Yeah.
think it's built in small, again, actions, right? I think we talk a lot about how all action is valuable because it makes something new possible. And
Yes.
so, even the act of, sitting on your porch, something that I remember doing in Loganspur growing up, like
Hmm.
occupying the front space of your home and being out on the sidewalk, and being able to talk with neighbors as they walked by, is something that I think is a small but really important action that we can take to build community wherever we are. And that presence, right? Presence and proximity being
Yeah.
the two most important ingredients for relationship building. And again, part of the reason that we think service is so valuable is because it makes us present in the
Hmm.
moment, and it also brings us proximate to the experiences of others. And so I still think those are the ingredients for success in my own life, that presence and
Yeah.
proximity are ultimately those building blocks.
And every little step helps, no matter
Yeah,
how small. It's a
the
step.
extension.
It's a
Yeah,
step forward. Every step forward is a positive step.
it's
Cecile,
putting your
I would
arm
like,
out, right?
right, like, yeah, initiating, just exactly. Cecile, I'd like to talk a little bit about teamwork Englewood. How did it started and why? Tell us all about it.
Sure. So Teamwork started in 2003. It was actually a collective initiative of different institutions at the time. St. Bernard Hospital, Pullman Bank, LISC, which is a national like intermediary group across the country, but they have offices here in Chicago. And what they were trying to do was to create a quality of life plan for the community. This
Hmm.
is a planning process that's community driven, that thinks through the priorities of residents and local stakeholders, puts it on a paper as a plan, and then usually there's a convening group or a group that helps to implement those key priorities and strategies. So Teamwork was actually created to help create that quality of life plan. The
Okay.
first plan goes from 2005 to 2015.
Hmm.
And I came on to Teamwork actually kind of as a volunteer.
Okay.
And I was active in the second quality of life plan formation, which started in 2016, which
Hmm.
ended up having so much more robust engagement with community leaders and stakeholders, coming off of some local momentum around Englewood Square, which is the new shopping mall that opened up in 2016, and some other great work that was being implemented by community leaders. So this second plan sounded like a great way to maximize community engagement and the development we were seeing to create a more sustainable plan to maintain all of these. And even though the pandemic has created some challenges for the community, the Englewood Quality of Life Plan has been a great tool to help Teamwork see where we can grow
Hmm.
and meet the priorities of the community, as well as helped other community groups and stakeholders take a hold of what community members are saying are important to them and kind of create this collective impact of us all working together on a shared agenda in different parts of quality of life issues for the community. So, our working groups include public safety, health and wellness, education and youth, jobs and economic development, and housing and public spaces. And before the pandemic, residents were meeting monthly to work on this, start projects, create programs, support the things that were working, having almost like more than a dozen projects and programs happening simultaneously that Teamwork was helping in the greater Englewood community.
Well, I did read a little bit about what Teamwork Englewood did for the residents during the pandemic, and it seemed like you guys were just front and center helping the residents.
Yeah, so Teamwork, in addition to the convening and the planning that we do at the large scale, we also do direct services here as well. So we run a robust returning citizen program here that helps with job placement and wraparound services. We work with women in job placement as well and wraparound services, especially for single-headed households in Inglewood. And we work with young people. So our clients went through a lot during the pandemic, and thankfully, our staff, mostly that live in Inglewood, were
Yeah.
actually able to learn what were some of these new barriers and issues that families were facing, like an all of a sudden food insecurity because they weren't working, needing
Hmm.
help getting benefits. We supported getting people internet connectivity during virtual learning, as well as increased youth programming for so many young people who were anxious and needed support
Yeah.
during virtual learning transition for the city. So a lot of what we did was in response to hearing real time what residents were struggling with, what we were personally struggling with, and then pivoting as much as we could.
So that seems like a big asset that so many of your staff are actually residents of Englewood because it's really hands on then. You're really
Oh,
at the
very much.
source.
And the
So,
other part I love about, having a staff that represents our community is that we see what's happening in our community from an asset lens, and we don't look at it from a deficit lens. So we're
okay.
building the community and doing programming by uplifting the great things that exist as opposed to always looking at what we don't have. We look at what we do
You
have
look
and
at
we
the
build.
positive,
Yeah.
right? So my guess is then that the residents of Englewood have had a very positive response.
To Teamwork.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Teamwork, sometimes I don't even know how some of our participants even know about us, A lot
Okay.
of how we get people to be involved has been through word of mouth,
Okay.
not even formal marketing strategies or anything like that. Our
Mhm.
doors sometimes open with a line of people saying, "Hey, my friend got a job here. I was wondering if you could help me," or "I'm interested in this youth program. My friend is in it and I want to be in it too. We're at the same high school." It's mostly word of mouth that actually supports the recruitment of our programming.
Okay. So what are some of the other organizations that Teamwork Englewood partners with?
Oh, yeah, we partner with dozens of community organizations and residents. Just to name a few, we work with Grow Greater Englewood, Growing Home, Imagine Englewood If, Resident
Wow.
Association of Greater Englewood, many of the local churches, Target Area Development Corporation with our safety program, St. Bernard Hospital, um, Howard Brown Clinic, Heartland Alliance. Everyone from hospital stakeholders to even Chicago Public Schools, where we run programming inside of. Teamwork has a robust network that helps with our collective impact work.
Oh, wow. So, um, Ellen, how is Chicago Cares currently involved with Teamwork Englewood?
Yeah, so our relationship started about 5 years ago. Our organization has been going through a pretty significant evolution over the last five
Okay.
years. And about 5 years ago, we decided to really shift our approach and launch something that we called the community investment strategy, which was really our way of getting deeper in relationship with communities, particularly communities like Englewood that had spent time and energy and expertise and wisdom on the ground to build these quality of life plans, which were
Okay.
basically a roadmap for how they wanted the community to be different and to grow
Okay.
and to develop. And so we, as an organization, started asking ourselves how we could support community driven and community led work in more
Mhm.
significant ways. And so Teamwork Englewood was one of the early communities that had a quality of life plan, had a clear vision and direction for the work they wanted to be doing. And we started conversations by asking how could volunteers be helpful? Like where are places in the quality of life plan that we might be able to lend our support through volunteers and through relationships with corporations. Many of our volunteers come through our corporate partners. How could we
Okay.
lend our resources to the work of the community and really bring greater visibility and again, great time, talent, treasure, all of those things around the work that was being led by and driven by community residents, both as you've
Mhm.
heard Englewood's amazing staff, but also their core of already amazing volunteers that are
Right.
working on a monthly basis. And so we asked Teamwork how we could join that work. And 5 years later, we've engaged over 3,000 volunteers in almost 500 projects in Englewood that are aligned to the quality of life plan or that are building the capacity of local organizations like some of the ones that she mentioned, Imagine
Mhm.
Englewood If, Grow Greater Englewood, to engage volunteers in their work. And so for us, again, it really goes back to that idea that we want people to connect to community driven, community led change. We want
Okay.
them to build relationships with the critical institutions that are doing amazing work every day, 365 days a year. And we want them to learn about the issues and the assets, right? Not just to Cecile's point, not just the challenges, but also the amazing assets, both community assets, the people assets, the cultural assets that are in a community, so that we can change our own narrative and approach about our city and start to invest in solutions differently. So
Yeah.
we think of ourselves again as sort of implementation catalyzer that we can bring people to the work in ways that are defined by and directed by Teamwork Englewood and their network of organizations. So that's been our commitment for the last 5 years. It's been a very robust partnership full of lots of different organizations in our network, many of which Cecile named, but also many different ways of working. So we've done everything from community murals. We're finishing up, fingers crossed this year, a public art project that
Mhm.
was a mosaic designed by the community, to grocery delivery with Grow Greater Englewood, to youth programming with
Okay.
IEI. And so we've had a lot of opportunity to really go deep instead of wide. And that's really been our approach for the last 5 years, is to get into deep relationship with transformational organizations and ask how we can use our position, our resources, and our people to advance that work at the community level.
Because it seems to me by going deep, you can get to the core. And then once you're at the core, you can spread out easier.
Yeah, and I think we can start to help set our volunteers on a path for greater civic engagement too. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
the thing that we're clear on is service is the start of the journey, not the end of the journey. And
Right.
that really service is the front door to the work of social change and to community
Mm-hmm.
change, but that there are so many other ways that we have to engage in order to really change our city and to change the systems and structures that govern our lives. So it's service plus. We talk about this a lot, that we want people to serve and we want people to give. We want people to advocate. We want people to join organizing efforts. We want people to vote and to lift their voices with their elected officials. And that all of that is civic engagement. And service is just a
Mm-hmm.
part of civic engagement. But to your point, yes, we get deep and then we start to see what more we can do and
Right.
really what more is needed of us to really transform our city. And so, what we appreciate about partners like Teamwork is that they really are like full service, right? They are doing the
Mm-hmm.
direct service work, but they're also doing the organizing work, and they're also lifting their voice on policy and practices that need to change. And they have a wealth of organizations that need resources and people, and so we can really put together a journey for volunteers that maybe starts with service and the question, how can I help? But
Right.
ends with a real clear path to how we can, as individuals, join collective efforts to really make change in our city.
And it seems to me that the community involvement with Teamwork Englewood has really enhanced enhanced your organization. And
Oh, yes.
Cecile, how do you go about raising funds, raising money for all these projects? Are there grants? Do you have
Yeah.
donors?
So the majority of our funding comes from some contract services that we do with the city of Chicago, where especially our returning citizen work, we are funded by the Department of Family Social Services, and then some of our funding comes from private foundations
Mm-hmm.
that support our work. I would like to say majority of our funders also support our journey, right? They
Okay.
are a part of us walking the path to learn what is working well and what we can then actually even leverage more resources when we find programs that work well, right? The last piece is a cool relationship that has emerged with Chicago Cares is actually some of the corporate partners that come to Chicago Cares trying to figure out the ways that they can get involved in the community end up being opportunities for funding for Teamwork Englewood and the other groups that Chicago Cares work with. Two examples is PepsiCo is a company
Okay.
that wanted to do work with young people, and Chicago Cares helped them to narrow down what that looked like. And we
Mm-hmm.
ended up beginning to actually form program partnerships with PepsiCo for our young people, in addition to receiving funds to enhance our youth work, which is a part of our quality of life plan to begin with. And then we started a very interesting relationship with Comcast that Chicago Cares helped to navigate that allowed us to think about the digital divide in Englewood and how Comcast can show up in more spaces around the
Mm-hmm.
need for internet connectivity and digital learning. And so we've been working on that project with Comcast. Again, that was facilitated through Chicago Cares, knowing what Teamwork was doing on the ground level during the pandemic and making the connection, but also knowing that some of the corporations also are thinking different about equity and their role in
Mm-hmm.
segregation and racial inequity in the city of Chicago. So our relationships can't just always be about one volunteer opportunity. But what Chicago Cares has done is helped corporations to think about long-term investments in communities that have been neglected, sometimes indirectly by systems that those corporations may have participated in. And so it's a really long-standing relationship built in addressing root causes in our community and have corporations be thought partners and investors, in addition to being volunteers.
So it really does help to have long-term commitment from these organizations.
Oh, definitely. You know, the injustices that communities like Englewood face, they didn't happen in a few years. They
Right.
happened after decades of disinvestment and institutionalized racism. So it's not going to be a quick fix that helps us to
Right.
restore and repair our communities. So having long-term commitment and partnership and willing to learn with each other is really important to help us unravel some of the things that are impacting the quality of life for Chicago and especially communities like Englewood.
Did you ever imagine this, Cecile? That
I do pinch myself a couple of days a week because I would have never imagined that I'd be doing this work in my own community where I raise my children. So I'm actually very
and to
humbled.
flourish and to flourish in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like a humble servant. So yes, actually, it's a great question. Sometimes I cannot believe that I'm doing all of this.
Mhm. Well, it seems to make you very happy. So, and I'm sure your children are proud of you.
Yes, I hope so. When I drag them to many community meetings late at night.
Well, I can't imagine that they would not be very proud.
Thank you.
I'm sure they just glow and smile when they think of mom.
Awesome. Yes, I think so.
So, how, Ellen, what changes in volunteerism have you seen over the years, despite, the pandemic lasting a couple of years? What has changed, and is it better?
Yes. So lots has changed, and the pandemic was a great disruptor, but Chicago Cares has also been working to disrupt the way that we do service for again more than 5 years and well before the pandemic. I think the truth is that service needs to change because of what we heard from Cecile already.
Hmm.
That service does need to become relational and find its relational roots again. We like to say that service has always been about the people. But there have been times and moments, even in our own history, where service has been about what we get done and not about who we get it done with. And we really want service to come back to the heart of what it's about, which is ultimately about connection and about people and about building relationships. And in our case, in Chicago, it's about building those relationships across our differences.
Hmm.
And so I think for us, service has to continue to lean into this evolution of being community driven and really led by the folks most directly impacted. It needs to be less about what makes us feel good at volunteers and really
Okay.
more about what we learn. And I think that that's a challenging message for a volunteer organization to sort of claim, but it is our mantle that not all service is comfortable and not all
Right.
service makes us feel good. That sometimes our most transformational service experiences make us uncomfortable and are
Hmm.
disruptive for us, but
Yeah.
they are growth experiences. They're
Right.
experiences that help us learn about ourselves and our city in deeper and more meaningful ways. So we believe that service is transformative, but it really matters how we do it. So again,
Right.
community driven matters a great deal to us. Doing this work in a way that is cognizant of history and particular our city's history around racial inequity is really important. So who decides what the project is matters. And at Chicago Cares, our community partners lead the work to define the projects. And then
Hmm.
we ask volunteers to join us, whether those are our corporate volunteers and partners, as Cecile mentioned, or community volunteers. So I think that we need to continue to embrace moving away from done in a day service or thinking
Right.
about service as something we do at the holidays. And we need to start thinking about service as both a powerful action and a way of life. How can we continue to incorporate that sort of service mentality into the way that we live our lives, into the way that we give, again, the way that we vote, the way that we lift our voices around policy and organize with our neighbors and show up in our communities. And that
Hmm.
service, when done in that relational way, that long term, committed way, gives us the chance to be transformed. So it doesn't mean that you have to, sign up to be a mentor once a week, but it can mean that you are joining a 4-week program with Chicago Cares. And not only are you serving, but you're learning about the issues and why food insecurity exists and what is food apartheid and this language that we are hearing a lot in the world. How do we really make meaning of that and understand it? So I think it's that we have to be willing and open ourselves up to serving differently to meet the moment. And that's what the pandemic required of us. Chicago
Right.
Cares, we overhauled our entire portfolio. We did things we'd never done before. We did virtual service, we did education only programs, we started text banking and phone banking Chicagoans about the
Hmm.
census and get out the vote and vaccine information. And those were things that never in our wildest dreams pre-pandemic would we have done. But that was what was
So the
required of us
pandemic
by our
was
partners.
the pandemic helped. I mean, it was. it actually was a positive thing in that aspect.
It
And
required yes, it required us to accelerate and evolve what we knew the change already need to be.
right. And you mentioned this a couple times, Ellen, about being a volunteer and being involved in actually learning from the experience. And
Yep.
my thought is, if you invest time and you actually learn something about that project, about the people, that you're volunteering to help, it's not just you're not just walking away with that, oh, I volunteered at a soup kitchen, I feel good about it, but you actually get involved and learn. I think
Yep.
that is a thing that makes people keep coming back to volunteer, I would think.
Yeah, and I think it's also indicative of what we really believe, that volunteering is a mutual experience, that it is not just about what you give, but it's about what you receive. And that is ultimately what makes it not just a chair. I think we often think as a service in a charitable framework that it's about giving back or giving to somebody else. And certainly there is a giving portion.
Right.
But what we want service to be is actually, again, mutual and relational. And so we want to also be cognizant of what we receive and frankly what
Hmm.
our needs are. And as a lifelong Chicagoan, I still have a lot to learn about our city and about the experiences of my neighbors and about
Yeah.
what it's like for Cecile to raise her kids in a neighborhood different from my own. And so I think that if we can take that humble posture as volunteers and as partners in the work, we can build relationships that are built on our mutual desire for change. And those are in essence always going to be transformative relationships because we're opening ourselves up to something new or
Right.
different for us.
And Cecile, I, Teamwork Englewood has done so much. What what do you see in the future? What else would you like to see Teamwork Englewood accomplish?
Oh, such a good question. But definitely we want to continue to expand how we show up for vulnerable residents, young people, people with backgrounds, single mothers. So
Yeah.
providing more programs and comprehensive support for them, right? So not just helping them get a job, but how do we help them think long term about being a
Hmm.
homeowner or starting a business in the community? How do we help young people think about college prep and what they want to do after high school and really being able to support them in their dreams, not just introduce them to the dream, right?
Right.
And then also thinking about the quality of life plan. How do we provide more economic development in our community? We just recently helped with the opening of another community grocery store in our
Okay.
community, and we're working on transitional housing for returning citizens, but more of that. So sometimes people just think of 63rd and Halsted as a place where investment is thriving. Part of Teamwork's work with our community partners is making sure that there's investment on all the corners of Englewood and all the corridors. Englewood is a very large community, and
Right.
so the impact from one small space is still very important. But how do we replicate it throughout the community and
Yeah.
have
How do we
multiple
spread it?
community run? Yeah,
Right.
multiple community run grocery stores and multiple small businesses being able to move into the community. And I think the larger part is as we continue to do good work in Englewood, how do we call out policies and change them as well? There's so much that's happening in our community that we bump up against long-term policies and practices, like how do we take care of the abandoned buildings and spaces in our
Hmm.
community when you have landlords who sit on properties, negligent properties, and don't give a resident an opportunity to maybe have that as their home or their business.
Hmm.
So I'm definitely interested in what the future holds and how Teamwork's programming shows up in more policy work to help move change along, and how even some of our corporate partners that we meet through Chicago Cares could be a
Hmm.
part of the work. Chicago Cares and Teamwork partnered during the census and GLTV work, and I also hope we do that work moving forward to build collective power in Englewood and also to mobilize with the allies that grow and become in love with the work that's happening in Englewood and also maximize our power and advocate for the rights and the needs of our residents.
Well, Cecile, you have such a passion for this, and as you do, Ellen. So I can't see how the partnership of Teamwork Englewood and Chicago Cares can't be anything but successful.
Thanks.
So, just in closing, Ellen, is there something that you'd like to tell us more about Chicago Cares that you'd like our listeners to know? And I'd also like you to let our listeners know how they could reach Chicago Cares.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, we partner with Teamwork Englewood, but we also work in a number of other communities across the city, actually upwards of 10 community areas now where we're doing this deep side by side work with organizations like Teamwork. So I think Englewood is such a beautiful example of what our partnership can mean, both for us as an
Mm-hmm.
organization in terms of how it changes us, but how it's continuing to support Teamwork Englewood and build those relationships, both again with our corporate partners who work with us as well as with Chicagoans who want to get more engaged.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's room for everyone, and we
Right.
really want Chicagoans to see service again as the start of their journey, to make an impact on our city, and it may not be where they end. We actually hope that folks get really attached to organizations like Teamwork Englewood and start to volunteer directly with them in the organizations that they work with, and join QLP committees, and do work to raise funds and support their small businesses. But we see ourselves again as sort of that starting point for many Chicagoans about where they find their place and their power to make
Yes.
change. And so it's an open invitation, both for Chicagoans that want to get more engaged. We have a calendar on our website, www.chicagocares.org, where you can sign up for programs that are with some of the organizations that Cecile mentioned, where you can sign up for education programs to learn about some of the issues that Cecile has talked about today. And where you can build your leadership development skills. So we actually do have leadership programs as well that
Oh,
help
okay.
volunteers to transition from, again, folks that are maybe exploring their place and finding their cause, to folks that are leading on these
Okay.
issues,
To
in
actually
side
being
by
an
side.
organizer.
Yeah, and I think, and again, sometimes it's an organizer, sometimes it's an advocate, sometimes it's a volunteer leader in our
Mm-hmm.
organization who wants to lead projects. So there are so many ways to get in where you fit in. That's something we often talk about in
Okay.
community work. It's like, get in where you fit in. But there's a lot of opportunity. So I think as an individual, our calendar is a great way to start. If you work though in a corporation, or you're a leader of a business that is thinking about community engagement. And again, I think in this particular moment, so many companies are trying to discern how they get in where they fit in, and
Mm-hmm.
how they make meaningful contributions at the community level to their social responsibility goals and to the fabric of our city. And Chicago Cares is a partner in that work. We are often a guide. We do consulting with companies about their CSR strategies, their corporate social responsibility strategies. We also do trainings for folks on civic engagement, how to actually engage community in a way that is community driven and does
Mm-hmm.
advance race equity and does practice cultural humility. So we have training offerings, and then we curate projects. So we do help to, as Cecile mentioned, build these relationships between companies and communities and organizations, and facilitate that. That was the word that
Right.
Cecile used. We facilitate that service. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that regardless of how you come to the work, whether it's through an institution or as an individual, Chicago Cares is, sort of the premier facilitator of service in Chicago. And we do it always in a model that is co-designed, where it is not
Okay.
just the volunteer's desire that is driving the process, but we're bringing community organizations to the table to help us design best in class, high impact service. And that, I think, is our distinctive edge. So when we think about, how you get into the work, we want to be an asset to both institutions and to individuals here in the city, to think about how we do service in this way that is relational, is community driven, and ultimately is going to help us build a more equitable Chicago.
Yeah. So it seems like you would, a volunteer would be getting all that they needed from Chicago Cares as far as, where to go, and, if they wanted leadership skills. It's like a one stop.
Yeah, we're trying to be pretty holistic in the way that we put
Hmm.
our arms around folks as they
Yeah.
journey to
Seems like
figure out
that.
how to make an impact.
Yeah. And Cecile, what about teamwork with Englewood? What else is there? Something else you'd like us to know that we haven't covered? And then also let our listeners know how they can help and reach you.
Sure. So I'll give a couple of ways that people can tap into our work. So the plan that we've been talking about, the Englewood Quality of Life Plan, uh, there are different stakeholders and different ways to be involved in the quality of life plan work. So on our website, www.teamworkenglewood.org, we have a interest form. And so there we're gathering information from people who might be interested in those 5 working groups I mentioned earlier: health and
Mhm.
wellness, housing and public spaces, education and youth, jobs and economic development, public safety. I think I got all 5. And then from there, we'll follow up and you can join in some of those meetings that we have where we discuss strategies, priorities, and projects. That's also the best way that sometimes the projects that even Chicago Cares is involved with teamwork. That's how you'll
Mhm.
find out about them, because they're happening inside of those working groups. And it's where
Okay.
we talk about, discuss, and plan them. Um, Secondly, on our social media channels is where we use that to actually talk about upcoming spaces where we have events or programs, or recruiting for those programs as well. And people can spread the word about those programs or learn from our staff how to be involved. So on Instagram, you just type Teamwork Englewood and
Mhm.
our Instagram handle will show up, as well as in our Facebook. And we're trying to get in the world of TikTok. That's usually been where all of our public safety work has been, is on
Okay.
our TikTok channel, and that's under our public safety campaign called Time 2136. So it's Time, and then it's the number 21 semicolon 36. And that stands for This Is My Englewood. And 21 and 36 is actually the 2 zip codes. Like
Oh.
Ellen started the conversation, our 2 zip codes of Englewood and West
Yeah.
Englewood. So that encompasses greater Englewood. That's so funny. We come back to zip codes. So
Right.
got to be proud of your zip code in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it's a community driven public safety program that we've been running for the last about 3 years. And it's beautification, public art that we do. We have a youth leadership program. We talk about trauma, mental health, and we work with violence prevention groups, as well as our local police department, to come up with creative leadership based ways of addressing crime in
Mhm.
Englewood. So that has its own social media handles as well, because it's really active, especially as the weather warm up. This past summer, we had activations almost every weekend in Time 2136 in our youth work. So there's always something to get into in Englewood that's positive, and that's
Okay.
part of the great work that I think Chicago Cares and us are uplifting, is that there's greatness happening in some of the communities that get a bad rap in the city of
Yes.
Chicago. And Chicago Cares helps to introduce people of how to get in tune and support the great things that are happening in communities like Englewood across the city.
And I'm so glad that Bridging Chicago is able to share the stories of both of you, and to, like, to your point, Cecile, about talking about the positive things going on in Inglewood. I'm glad that we're able to be a part of that. So
Thank
I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, and it was truly a pleasure. And I hope that we can meet again sometime and do another episode. That would be great.
Awesome.
We'd love
Thank
it.
you.
And
Thank
good
you so
luck to both of you. Thank you so much for all the things that you do for Chicago.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions, and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.